Great. Okay, why don't we get started? So, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our coffee and climate session this morning. My name is Troy Moon. I'm the Director of Sustainability for the City of Portland. I'm joined by my colleague from South Portland, Julie Rosenbach. And we are thrilled to see so many of you tuning in. We're just over 50, heading for 60 attendees and climbing. So thank you so much for coming to talk this morning about the future of solar in Maine. So if anyone's been following solar for any period of time, you know, like the only thing constant about policy around solar is that it changes all the time, right? So for the past 2 decades or so, you know, one of the major drivers of solar policy has been the federal investment tax credit, which gave 30% tax credit for installing solar. And that's been a very popular and, you know, fueling growth of the industry for sure. Since about 2020, Maine had a net energy billing program that um, certainly definitely spurred solar growth in the state. And we've seen a lot of change. If you look at the Maine Department of Energy Resources solar dashboard, which I recommend, it shows that we have about 1,700 megawatts of installed solar in Maine. Like that comes from over 21,000 individual projects. So definitely solar is a significant factor here in the state. But there's been a lot of changes recently, of course. So um, the ITC that we just mentioned is expired at the end of 2025, not renewed. And there's been a lot of changes at the state level around the energy billing rules that will impact things going forward. So the solar coaster continues, and that's one of the things we're going to talk about today. And we want to talk about how that affects different models that people can access solar, whether it's community solar, rooftop solar, cooperative approaches, and you know what's the future for state level incentives, and how are we positioning ourselves to meet the state's climate goals around, particularly around renewable energy. So in sum, lots of changes have happened recently. And so this Coffee and Climate brings together a really great panel of experts who will dig into the questions, and we'll be discussing the future of Maine, a future of solar in Maine. So just a couple housekeeping questions before we get going. We are recording this, and we're going to make a link available later. So we'll be sending out an email with some of the resources and websites that might be of interest, as well as a link to the recording. There is a Q&A feature now and available for our Coffee and Climate, so you'll see that at the bottom of the screen. And we're going to, you know, do some questions with our panelists, and we're going to have time at the end for people to either, you know, you can either raise your hand and come on and ask your question in person, or we'll also kind of, Julie and I will be looking at the questions in the Q&A, and we'll be distilling some of those and you know bring them to the panelists. So let's do some quick introductions. So I'm going to introduce Celina Cunningham, who is the Deputy Commissioner at the Maine DOER. And if we could, Celina, if you don't mind giving us the 1 minute thumbnail sketch of what your agency does.
Sure. Thanks, Troy. It's great to be here with all of you today. So we are the Department of Energy Resources in Maine. It's a newly established department. Previously, we were the Governor's Energy Office, and we are charged with elements of energy planning, policy, and program development. And we're the state designated energy office. And so we provide information related to home energy fuel prices, monitor markets, and develop policies across the energy spectrum.
Great, thank you very much. And next, I'd like to introduce Nate Bowie, who's the Regional Vice President for Maine at Revision Energy. So Nate, if you don't mind doing the same, a quick little 1 minute or so introduction to Revision Energy. Oh, you're on mute, Nate.
Thanks, Troy. Yeah, Nate Bowie from Revision Energy. Been with the company in 15 years now, and I'm nearly a lifelong Mainer. Grew up in Westbrook. Revision is a 23-year-old electrical transition company. At least that's what we are now. We've been a solar company for that long, doing originally solar hot water, doing solar PV, battery storage, EV, commercial, residential, heat pumps, all of the things. So bringing Mainers new opportunities to reduce their electricity cost and through sustainable energy.
Great, thanks a lot. And now I would like to introduce Emily Rochford, who is the Community Engagement Manager with Maine Community Power Cooperative. And so please, Emily, share a little bit about your company.
Yeah, thanks so much, Troy. So Maine Community Power Cooperative, we do really small scale cooperatively owned community solar. So all of our members right now, we're just in CMP territory, but they can see a discount on their utility bill. We really try to center this member focus first, and so have designed our model around, what's best for the member and the consumer. And of course, that's kind of through our cooperative governance with our member owners.
Great, and thanks. And finally, we'd like to introduce Heather Sanborn, who is our main public advocate. And so, Heather, please give us a quick overview of what the office does.
Thanks so much, Troy. Yeah, I'm really thrilled to be the public advocate and to run the office of the public advocate. We are a little law firm that is independent agency of state government that represents utility ratepayers throughout the state in front of the legislature, in front of the PUC, and in front of regional and national regulatory bodies as well. And so we're looking out for making sure that our utility bills stay manageable, and that we accomplish this clean energy transition in an affordable manner.
Great. Thanks for those introductions, everybody. I think we're ready to start off with some questions, and I think we'll start off with a question for the whole panel. So with the 30% federal tax credit gone, does solar still make sense? And how is industry evolving to keep solar affordable? So let's start with Nate. Without the federal subsidy, like how does solar make sense? And how is your industry and your company evolving to keep solar running in our neighborhoods?
Sure, thanks. Solar makes sense. Of course it does. Solar energy right here in Maine is American-made energy. It's also the least expensive way we can produce electricity. If you couple that with our current state of extreme energy prices, solar electricity is obviously a no-brainer. Our energy prices are the highest they've ever been. They're also likely to be the lowest they'll ever be moving forward. So welcome to our new utility cost normal. Investing in solar in 2026 comes with new ways to finance the investment, comes with higher density solar panels, more robust warranties, lots of other things. And you pair those things against our high utility costs, and all of a sudden solar today in a post-tax credit world is as good as it was a year ago, in some cases even better. Solar investment also means locking in an electricity rate for decades, which provides protection against utility cost volatility. All that said, there's still room to make solar more accessible, and Maine does have an opportunity to be a national leader when it comes to state policy. And that can make Maine-made energy accessible for everyone. Things like modernizing utility rate design to allow for greater return on investment for solar customers and reduce costs for all ratepayers, things like allowing sales tax exemptions for solar, streamlining solar permitting across jurisdictions rather than each town handling it individually. And we can hold our main utilities accountable to provide fair and predictable interconnection costs. Maine is quite terrible on that front, actually, compared to other solar markets. There's room to grow there.
Well, Emily, maybe we can jump to you from another industry perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I think to Nate's point about having solar, and whether you own that or participate in a different form of benefiting from solar, kind of locking in that lower price of electricity. And so in our cooperative model, it's kind of similar to a food co-op. So our members are owners of the cooperative in general, but they still benefit from our cooperative having these projects kind of locked in. So they have that ownership as well. And that's accessible for folks who might not be able to afford to put rooftop, but can still have that ownership mindset. I will say, because we operate more commercial projects, the commercial federal tax credits will continue to be available for projects that are currently in construction and will be completed by late 2030. And so what this means is that most of the projects that are coming online now and in the next couple years will still benefit from these tax credits. And so for existing subscribers or folks who participate in other versions of community solar, these federal changes don't necessarily mean that they'll see any changes on their bill or changes to the savings that they're receiving. And of course, this might differ by community solar provider. So definitely, check with whoever you're signed up with. But in general, there likely won't be a huge impact on savings. And then for projects coming online, after 2030, there is a possibility that those federal tax credits may be reinstated. But, that's really unknown at this point.
Cool. Thanks, Emily. Maybe Celina, do you have a thought on this question?
Yeah, I think obviously we've seen a lot of success in terms of the amount of solar that we've developed in the state, and it's instrumental in terms of helping us meet our long-term energy needs, as well as reducing our reliance on fossil fuels, which obviously is the key driver to our high energy prices here in Maine. So when we look at the future without tax credits, I mean, definitely there are headwinds when you think about the impacts of a federal policy. However, solar is an important part of our long-term energy mix. It's important that we think about how we do that and be really thoughtful about there's all sorts of different scales and models for how you can develop solar. Some of those are easier for some people and homeowners, and others are more challenging. And then some cost more than others do. And so when it comes to building solar, we are definitely going to need more generation in the state, including solar, and want to do so in a way that really protects all ratepayers.
And then for Heather, finally, that's a great way lead in for the responsibilities of your office. How do we keep the industry moving with that in mind, that affordability and fairness for both solar customers who have solar and for ratepayers who don't?
Yeah, I really think we're coming to a period where solar is going to make a ton of sense as long as batteries are along for the ride. And the interesting connection there is that with the changes in federal policy, a lot of supports for EVs were pulled away in that federal policy change, and it left battery manufacturers and EV manufacturers really holding on to all this battery manufacturing capacity. And what we've seen in the last just 18 months is the price of that storage really just sinking faster than anyone would have expected, and a real glut in the market for batteries that are just the right size for installing in people's homes. And I think as we think about affordability moving forward, particularly in Versant territory, but we're getting there in CMP as well, we really need to start time shifting the solar so that it's covering the energy needs of Mainers during our peak hours when electricity is most expensive. So I think that's really the future, is making sure that we've got the right signals and the right policies in place so that solar plus storage makes sense at all different scales. And I think federal policy is actually kind of pushing us in that direction as well because of its impacts on the battery market that are actually favorable for moving in this direction. So I'm hopeful about it.
Right. So the 30% still available for battery projects. Is that right, Heather?
It is, and there's also a really exciting small battery program through Efficiency-Maine. So if people are thinking about getting like a standby generator, not that common in Portland or South Portland, but maybe have a camp or something like that elsewhere in the state, and we can avoid fossil fuel standby generators because these batteries are really good at doing the job and a really good option to look into. So recommend people check out the Efficiency-Maine website and get more information on that.
Great. Thanks. I'll pan it over to Julie for our next question.
Thanks, Troy. Celina, this is a question to start with for you. With the work you're doing at the Department of Energy Resources is pivotal in translating Maine's clean and affordable energy goals into the policies and partnerships that are going to help us reach those goals. So with the loss of federal incentives, how is the state thinking about solar and the part it plays in meeting the goals of both the Maine's energy plan and our renewable portfolio standard?
Thanks, Julie. So as a department, we're focused on delivering affordable and reliable and increasingly cleaner energy for Maine people and businesses. And I think it's important to just to stop and talk about fossil fuels for a minute, given our reliance on them and what it has meant for our energy prices. As many people know, we are the most home heating oil reliant state in the country. 90% of our petroleum is imported. Right now, gas prices are obviously, going above $4 a gallon in terms of filling a tank. It's 42% more expensive in terms of per gallon than it was before the Iran war. So those are obviously impacting people on a day-to-day basis. In addition, from a regional perspective, 50% of our regional electricity mix is natural gas. And if you look at what happened this last winter when prices were high, we saw a lot of oil used to create for our electricity as well. And so when you think about our energy plan going forward, so the state is responsible for completing a energy plan every 2 years. And through that process, we look at what are our long-term energy needs and how are the best ways to achieve those. And so we think about all of our statutory requirements associated with greenhouse gas emissions, as well as our renewable portfolio standard requirements, which require a certain percentage of renewable energy related to for electricity used in the state. And so we are, I think, pursuing a diverse approach in terms of how to meet our long-term goals and want to be mindful about the pace of development and also making sure that we have the grid and the infrastructure to meet that demand over time. In Maine, we have robust renewable resources, and so that's where we're focusing. And I think over the last couple of months, we've worked to expedite procurements through the Public Utilities Commission to take advantage of these tax credits before they're gone to bring some lower cost projects to Maine. And I think we are seeing the results in terms of last summer, ISO New England saw a reduction in the peak demand during the summer that saved saved a lot of money for people in the region, which is important. So we have launched our process for the development of the next energy plan that's due in January 2027. And through that, we really want to get feedback in terms of what are the key objectives and areas of focus that we should spend and have outlined in the energy plan. And so we released a request for information, and I'll try to drop that in the chat after this, where we're just trying to get some information from stakeholders, from community members to understand what are the priorities and how we can fit that into the energy plan. And so we'll have other opportunities for engagement over the time there. So definitely welcome engagement through that, and think that solar overall absolutely will need to be a part of this mix. We know that our energy demands are increasing, and it's a key answer into the long-term needs of Maine.
Thank you. That's a great answer. And I would love to open this question up to Heather and Emily and Nate for your thoughts on policies and programs from your unique perspectives. Do you want to start, Heather?
Sure. I mean, I think we have a great opportunity this year to design the successor program to our community solar program. So last year we passed LD 1777, which basically kind of put a cap on the front of the meter community solar program that was based on sort of one-for-one net energy billing that started in 2019, and tasked DOER with doing a stakeholder process and designing a program that will be the successor to that. The statute requires it includes storage. You're going to hear me talk about storage a lot today. And we look forward to that. And I know that DOER is launching that process very shortly with a consultant that they're in the process of finalizing their hiring for. And so we're enthusiastic about that. But I also want consumers to know that there is still community solar that was built under the old program that is not fully subscribed. So if folks are interested in, getting a community solar subscription, there are many options available. I don't know if Emily's organization has availability. I think they do, but certainly lots of other community solar options as well. So those still exist and is a way that people can save money right away. They just have to really understand what that looks like for their billing over the course of the year, all of those kinds of things. But there are opportunities out there.
Thanks, Heather. I want to before I go to Emily to talk a little bit more about that. I know that people are solicited by many different companies in many different ways for community solar, and I wonder if you could just spend a minute before we go to Emily about how people might, sort of look at their options and assess the best options for them, and the role of the public advocate in that process for people.
Yeah, absolutely. We can answer questions. And especially a lot of questions we get are just sort of how do I get in touch with my community solar provider? Because your CMP bill doesn't necessarily say who it is. And folks lose track of emails or, digital signups, those kinds of things. So we can help make those connections for you. But some of the things to think about when you're thinking about any kind of solar is how are you going to get billed for both the generation that's coming from the solar panels, especially if you don't own them, you're going to get billed for some kind of cost associated with those panels on a regular basis. And what's the impact going to be on your electric bill? To what extent, what parts of the bill is it going to reduce? All of those kinds of things, and really making sure you're asking those questions. And then if you don't understand the answer, like asking them again or asking them of someone else, including the OPA. And we can walk you through how it really works. One of the things that a lot of customers find very difficult about community solar is that many companies use a method of billing where you get billed when the generation is credited to your account. So you get billed for a lot of solar credits in the summertime. And then in the wintertime, you've got a bank of those credits, and you draw them down, and nobody's billing you for them at that point in the winter. So especially Mainers who have put heat pumps into their homes and use those primarily for heating in the winter, see these very high solar plus CMP bills in the summertime, and then relatively lower bills, or even that sort of almost no bill from their solar provider and their utility in the wintertime, which is very counterintuitive because we know we're using a lot more power in the winter if you have heat pumps. And so budgeting for that, and also being able to understand whether you're really getting the savings that you were expected or promised by the community solar provider, can be really hard to do that math. You almost have to make yourself your own spreadsheet. We can help walk you through that at the OPA, but basically it's important that you realize that it's going to change sort of seasonally what your bills look like from a heating and cooling perspective when you layer that solar bill on top. Really hard to wrap heads around until you've been through it almost for an entire year in order to see how it plays out over that year. But it is an option. And I mean, I have a community solar subscription. I think that it is absolutely an option for people to save money as long as they really understand what they're getting into. Solar leasing and is something where you really, really have to understand what impact it might have on the value of your home, and what happens, for example, if you're going to move in, need to sell the house. Asking those right questions. What happens if a tree falls on your roof? Who's responsible? What if the roof itself needs to be fixed? All of those things, just questions to ask, right? And make sure that you totally understand what you're getting into with having someone else's panels living on top of your most valuable asset for most people. And so all of those kinds of things are questions to ask. We have some information about community solar on the OPA website, and we also have a consumer advocate who answers the phone all day long, answers emails, and can walk you right through your bills as well, if you want that expert kind of to hold your hand through the process. We're happy to do that.
That is fantastic information, and it sounds like we need to have a future coffee and climate about how to make sure that you are able to track your community solar subscription. I'd love to. Thanks, Heather. I'd love to move to Emily to hear more about if you guys have capacity, and then just sort of end with Nate to give you a chance to talk about sort of programs.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Julie. And I'd just like to highlight kind of two areas of our program and model that really address a lot of what Heather was saying. And so the first is how we allocate our credits from our projects. As Heather was saying, often it's done by when that generation occurs. And so folks will see, higher bills often in the summertime, and then they see those savings in the winter. And so as a cooperative, we kind of manage that bank of credits, and we use what's called cascading allocation to assign credits to our members. And essentially what that means is that we're only ever going to assign credits to match with the usage of our members. So all of our members will consistently see that discount. And so we kind of take on that bank as a cooperative, and then kind of issue those credits to make sure that folks are seeing consistent savings and their bills aren't going up. So that savings is kind of drawn out. And then the second part is our billing system. So our default option is to send folks just one bill. So they'll see, exactly what they would have paid CMP minus the discount, and then we pay CMP on behalf of our members. And so that just kind of eases that process and confusion of, seeing two bills and not being really sure where those savings are. So that's just kind of two pieces that we've really tried to address this issue of, confusion and savings and, rising costs and seeing where that is. And I maybe to go back a couple steps too, I know Heather and Celina were talking a bit about, this new policy or a new look at these front of the meter projects. And so I think part of that original issue of, why this kind of got out of hand and why we need a successor program to address those issues is that it was really broad. And so what we're hoping for is, a look at new community solar and to see how different projects operate differently and the differences between them. And so we're really excited to be working with Heather and Celina, the OPA and DOER in this process of, how cooperative models can fit in there as well. And I did, also want to address our capacity in our projects. So we really focus and have priority on low to moderate income households. So for folks who qualify as low to moderate incomes, if you participate in any government assistance programs, SNAP, WIC, TANF, then there is capacity in our first couple projects for folks who are income eligible. So they can join today and start to see savings from our first projects in just a few billing cycles. For folks who don't qualify into that income eligible category, we are at capacity for the rest of our projects, but folks are more than welcome to sign up. There's no cost up front, and then just kind of get in the queue and see that. We'll let you know when we have projects available.
That's great to know. Thank you so much. Nate, what are your thoughts?
Well, it sounds like we're all on the same page here, actually, which is really great. I did want to talk about, I guess, just to echo what I'm hearing from the other folks on the call here is that a successor program to offsite solar is just extremely important to Maine's future for grid resiliency and to couple that with distributed generation at people's homes. There's lots of ways to do that. We've heard a little bit about subscription solar here today. Revision Energy also does member-owned community solar, which is a slightly different model and is interesting and fairly unique, where homeowners, really anybody who has an electric bill, that you do not have to be a homeowner, you can be a renter. Anybody who has an electric bill can participate in investing in a community solar project that they own. And so large project off-site, perfectly oriented to the sun, making great electricity all year long. The person investing in that owns a little piece of that and is able to capture the kilowatt hours generated from that larger solar project through net metering. And so you get a one-to-one value of that kilowatt hour. really great savings in this first situation where, maybe you don't own the roof, you live in a condo, or you live in the shade, or live near a lake, and you can't cut trees down. There's lots of reasons why, or maybe you consume enough electricity where you cannot put enough solar on your own rooftop to offset your entire electric usage. So there's lots of great reasons why offsite solar is super important to have a successful program here in Maine that works well for businesses and homeowners and renters, really anybody with an electric bill. Yeah, I'll stop there and move on.
Troy, before I kick it back to you, I just have a follow-up question. With the subscription models, I'm thinking specifically about renters. Can it be truly a month-to-month endeavor, or is there some amount of time that you want to know that you're going to be at your place with that electrical bill? Because I know that, Heather, you were talking about how there's ebbs and flows in terms of credits. So can you speak to that a little bit?
I sure can, yeah. So with a subscription model, just kind of focusing on that, because investing in one of the revision projects would be a different question. But with the subscription model, if you plan on staying in the utility territory of a particular utility, so like if you're going to stay in CMP territory, but you might move to a new apartment, then you're probably in good shape to have a solar subscription, because you'd be able to move your credits with you as long as you stay within the same utility. So same would be true if you're in Versant and stay in Versant. But if you think you might move out of state, or if you might move from one part of the state to another where there would be a different utility, we would recommend that well before, maybe many months before that, you start thinking about winding down your solar subscription so that you can make sure you've spent all of or used up all of the credits that you may have already paid for and that you banked before you move. And then making sure that you're not leaving any of those credits sort of banked at the utility that you've already paid your solar provider for, because you are not likely to get a refund or be able to move those credits to anyone else. So that would be our suggestion. And it just adds another thing that you have to manage. And it's not, intended to be a scam or a trap. It's really just another thing that you've got to like pay attention to on your as you're managing that moving process. So definitely an option for renters, and for a lot of folks, we know we're going to stay in the Portland area, and so it wouldn't be an issue. But yet another thing to be a factor when you're considering how to get involved with community solar.
Great. So thank you for that answer. So switching gears a little bit, we've talked about some of the approaches people can use to access solar. One that we're getting a lot of questions in the chat in our Q&A section is about the new plug-in solar bill that just passed. So I don't know if this is for Heather or Celina, but I don't know who wants to take a stab at maybe talking about what the plug-in solar bill is and how people might start thinking about participating in solar through that type of approach.
Sure. As many people may read about, there is a lot of interest around the country when it comes to plug-in solar, and it is new in terms of the U.S. And so it's early days here. But there was some uncertainty around how you could safely interconnect small scale solar arrays into your home. And so what the law does that the governor recently signed set some standards to make sure that you can interconnect these types of plug-in solar and how to do so safely. And I think that's an important tool to let consumers choose how they're going to utilize the resources like this. And it's a little bit early to say what it will mean in terms of long-term savings, but I think it's always helpful to have a variety of options for consumers when it comes to plug-in comes into energy usage, and also to do so in a way that will make it easier and not have any sort of electrical issues there. But I don't know, Heather, what else you'd add about the bill?
Yeah, it's really exciting. It's passing in a lot of different states, but I think we're still kind of waiting for the Underwriters Laboratory to release some standards. And I think that retailers in the US are going to be cautious until that happens. In Germany, you can go to Costco and buy like a big plug-in solar and battery set up for your house. Another way we can get batteries into people's houses. And that's just not going to be on the table yet in Maine for a little while. I think until the UL listing issues get resolved and hopefully get resolved in a way that doesn't drive up the cost of these things too much. I think one of the things that we do in the US around storage, around solar, around a lot of these things is drive up the cost of actually implementing it based on soft costs like permitting, interconnection costs, safety regulations that might be like really extreme. And so those types of things can really make it more expensive to implement storage or solar or both here in the US than it is in places like Australia and other parts of the world.
Great. Actually, that's a good segue. I'd like to ask Nate, maybe you can talk about some of those things that drive up costs of solar. I know if you read the news, you hear about in Australia, it's so much cheaper to do, solar. And certainly it's a lot of different conditions there, but what are the factors that drive costs for solar installers in Maine?
Yeah, I spoke a little bit about it earlier, but there's a significant amount of hoops to jump through to go from somebody who says, yes, I want to go solar, to actually having it on their roof and producing electricity and saving them money each month on their utility bills. There's code requirements, fire code, building code. There's significant friction with solar permitting, both for residential and especially for commercial. Interconnection is one of the things that drives us crazy and our customers crazy. File an interconnection paperwork in a place where you think you should get a yes answer immediately after you submit to the utility, and then it can take weeks or months, even depending on the utility. Come to find out that they have to do in-person site inspection and take a look at what is on the road out in front of the house, and then getting denials, and it can be a long process, and can really drive up costs. I think, like I mentioned earlier, holding our utilities accountable to do this well is going to be a really important step alongside of streamlined permitting to keep our overhead costs down so they don't need to be passed through to the customer.
So Emily, do you have any kind of thoughts about challenges for community solar providers that raise costs for customers?
Yeah, I think I would just echo a lot of what kind of Heather and Nate are saying. A lot of these like background costs. So Nate was saying like permitting and these interconnection costs. A lot of that in community solar development, the developer, pays for, all of this permitting and, tests and, things that you would seem would be easy to just, get a check from the utility. But that really kind of adds to the cost to go through a lot of that process.
Great. I think I'm going to pass it back to Julie for our next formal question.
Yep. So I have one last formal question, and there are so many great questions in the Q&A. We might need to have another session at some point. Okay. Our last question. Troy talked about the solar coaster of net energy billing policy, and I just wonder if I can hear maybe just a short snippet from each of you. What can we expect moving forward, do you think, and what would you like to see moving forward? Celina, do you want to start?
Sure. So there are two different types of net energy billing. One is the larger projects, the community solar type projects we've been talking about, and then the smaller rooftop projects, which you can still continue to use net energy billing. As Heather mentioned, the legislature tasked the department with creating a future community solar program. And so we are going to launch that work shortly. We have a proposal due to the legislature, I'm sorry, to the Public Utilities Commission in September. And while there is the requirements for how we design that program are really specific in the law. And so we're going to go ahead and meet those. But what we're also going to do is take a big step back to make sure when we think about projects of this scale, what is the best way to fit this into our energy mix? Where are there needs? How can we design it in addition to the ways that are outlined in the law to make sure that we're putting the state on having policies in place that would be helpful for years to come. And I hear you're probably going to change these again in the future. But the most important piece of that plan that we're working on is to make sure that these are cost effective and do not add additional costs to ratepayers. And so that is our driving piece here, while also focusing on supporting solar and storage, which is an important part of this overall over the long term.
So I heard Nate say solar is completely cost effective, and yet I know that there's the chance for distributed energy projects to add to ratepayer costs. Can we move to Heather next? Do you I mean, in terms of also the policy question moving forward, but why is this seeming contradiction?
Sure. So because of the way we designed our net energy billing program in Maine, it has, I think I would say, overvalued solar at this point. The first 1,000 solar panels that were put on people's roofs, and then the next 1,000 and so forth, all compensated in the same way, which is that you get a 1-for-1 credit on both the supply that you didn't use because you used it inside your own home, and the stuff that you send back to the grid that somebody else in your neighborhood uses. And then you also get a full credit for the transmission and distribution, even though whenever it's dark out, you are fully using that transmission and distribution system to be able to power your home. So we designed our net energy billing system that way for rooftop. Then we expanded it to this front of the meter system that became very huge very quickly. And what that meant is, now we had 100,000 Maine households enrolled into community solar that weren't paying for the poles and wires at night anymore. And so the costs of those poles and wires at night had to be spread over the folks who weren't enrolled, through everybody really, in the form of that fixed charge on your residential bill or on your small commercial bill. And it's on everybody's bill, but in different form. And I think that design, that policy design of just how we put in place the compensation mechanism can just be rethought. The solar itself, especially if you add storage, does add value to our grid and can be done cost effectively, especially with the price of batteries coming down at all sizes in today's marketplace. What we see today, especially on a day like today, when folks are not going to be using much heat and not going to be using much cooling, but the solar panels are going to be generating tons and tons of electricity during the middle of the day today, is that we've got too much solar on our system, especially in central and northern Maine, unless we start to soak it up with some storage, so that we can not have a situation where all the fossil fuel generators need to kick on at 6 o'clock tonight or at 7 o'clock tonight and just ramp us up as that solar that solar disappears all at once. So we need those batteries, we need storage of all sizes in order to make sure that we have cost-effective usage of the solar energy that we have already installed and will continue to install in Maine. As long as we can time shift it into the evening when people are using a lot of energy, getting home from work, plugging in their cars, whatever it might be, when it gets cold and you turn on your heat pumps more in the evenings, we want that energy to be renewable as well. And so we've got to time shift it away from those solar hours. And that's just that's the future of the policy. And that's what we'll be advocating for in order to make all of this more cost effective.
Thank you. Do others want to weigh in on what what we can expect and what you'd like to see? Nate.
Thanks. Just like to start by generally disagreeing with the idea that solar adversely affects all ratepayers. There's actually been plenty of studies, not by utilities, that shows that the value of solar benefits all ratepayers. If you think about it, the highest cost to buy the energy to bring into Maine is when it is sunny outside. And that happens to be when solar is also generating its most electricity. And so it actually saves all ratepayers money by not having the utilities buy the electricity from somebody else, someplace else when it is expensive. Just to get back to the net metering question, net metering today in Maine is wonderful. It produces a huge benefit to people who are investing in solar, but also all ratepayers. There are ways that we can move forward with net metering. There's many states that are changing their net metering programs. I'd encourage the state of Maine to really take a look at across state borders, which doesn't always happen because there are programs out there that work. There are also programs out there that do not work. One of the next steps in net metering, I think, is going to be to modernize our rate design, allowing for time of use and producing a higher value of solar in the daytime. That's going to increase adoption and save all ratepayers money also. We can also, I think, do a much better job rate design and through net metering provide a better value of solar for our commercial customers who are the especially our small businesses or the backbones of our communities. They need a way to control their energy costs in a better way. And we have a great opportunity in Maine to be able to provide that through new rate design for them. And I just wanted to circle back real quick also on how we go solar here. We are going to need a robust net metering program here in Maine. There's plenty of ways to go solar. We think about how do you go solar. A lot of times we think about, well, you put it on your roof or you put it in your backyard or you do an offsite solar program like we've talked a lot about here. I think of how we go solar as how we actually get the solar. And that is, how do we invest in it? Through cash, through finance. You can finance with a green mining lending company. There's home equity line of credits that a lot of people use also. There's also solar leasing, which I can't see the audience, but I think when someone says leasing solar, people probably tend to cringe a little bit. And that's because we've heard countless stories of predatory lease companies, national companies, leaving customers with upside down utility bills where they're actually paying more for their solar lease kilowatt hour on the rooftop than they would have if they just continue to pay the utility for electricity. Just want to let the panel and the audience know that that is a version of solar leasing, but there is new and local solar leasing opportunities available that provide zero utility escalator, so you don't become upside down on your solar lease. There's also leases available right here through Revision Energy, where you are leasing to own. So you're building equity in the array on your roof, and the path towards ownership happens in the 6th year. So there's really new and exciting opportunities for people to go solar. It will require that robust and positive net metering program here in Maine.
Go ahead, Emily. Thank you, Nate.
Yeah, thanks so much. I did kind of want to echo Nate a little bit as well, and just kind of come back to, what Heather was saying of this front of the meter net energy billing going away for folks. And I think Heather might have mentioned earlier as well, there still are projects that have been built and have these net energy billing agreements. And so what that means is that they can still participate in net energy billing for projects that exist or have gotten these agreements, and those agreements are for 20 years. So if you are still looking to subscribe to community solar, or already subscribed, or a member of either Revision's program or a cooperative like Maine Community Power Cooperative, those benefits still remain and will remain into the future. So you can still see and kind of have confidence in that decrease on your electricity bill and the benefits from that. And I would just add that in this policy, by maintaining net energy billing policy for rooftop solar and taking that away for the front of the meter, we're really kind of reserving that benefit for homeowners who can afford to invest in those systems. And so for renters or folks who might not be able to put that upfront investment, it really cuts a lot of people off from seeing that direct benefit on their utility bills, and from having any option of ownership level, whether that's through a cooperative or community owned community solar project. So I think it is really important to consider who is being left out of this conversation and these benefits. And so we're working with DOER to make sure that this new policy really looks at each program of what is actually beneficial, instead of kind of doing this broad benefit towards all types of community solar, because it can look really different. There are different models, different sizes of, different sizes of projects and where they're located on the grid. And so that does really make a difference. And so we're hoping that that difference is really looked at, and, whether or not that includes storage and where storage makes sense. We're really excited to explore that and see what options might be there. But I think it is important to really look at each project and model and how they might differ from one another.
Great. So I think, Celina, that you'll have some robust community input and engagement as you work on your successor program to present later in the year. And so we'll certainly share out the the contact information for your public engagement process with our follow-up email. We've covered a lot of questions that people have asked during the Q&A as course of our conversation. There's a couple that hopefully we can get to. And one of them, I think is more for Emily, is people want to know how to size their community solar subscription, because it's really, I think we've heard from the conversation, it's really important to get it right to match the number of credits you are basically acquiring versus how many you actually need. And I think I've heard a few horror stories of maybe people who oversubscribed. And so how does a community solar provider help make sure that their customers actually are getting a good deal and matching load?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, the way that we allocate our credits through this cascading allocation model ensures that we're only ever offering credits to what that usage is. And so we invest a lot of, our time and investment through our team to look at that utility data. And so we are able to see when folks, sign up to become a member, they connect their CMP account. And so every month we look at their usage and we make sure that the right amount of credits is allocated to that. So it's always matching up. So they will never see, a bank of credits, piling up on their bill. We kind of take on that management. That's not necessarily true for other forms of community solar. And so one thing to pay attention to, and I would love to hear, Heather, what, opportunities and assistance that the Office of the Public Advocate might offer But what we generally advise when we hear this question from folks who are already subscribed is to really pay attention to those columns. I think it's on the second or third page of your CMP bill. There's that chart of, allocated generation, and you can see, if your banked generation keeps going up and up and up, and you're never really pulling from that bank generation, or it doesn't go down to zero in those winter months once you've used that bank, that can be a really big red flag where, you may be paying too much for credits. You've bought excess credits than you need. And so if there's any credits ever in that unused expired credits column, that's another big red flag that you are maybe paying too much for those credits. And I believe, and I'll let Heather speak to more of the details on this, that community solar providers now have to pay that back to consumers.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight that in the solar reform bill that we passed last year, we at the Office of the Public Advocate were very concerned about what we saw as a trend, not from Emily or Nate's organizations, but from the more standard, large scale, out of state often or multinational even owned community solar providers that use a regular time of generation community solar subscription model, that they were increasing folks' subscription size because they had unsubscribed shares in their solar farms. And so in LD 1777, we said, don't do that. You have to be responsible for correctly sizing your subscribers' shares and resizing them according to changes in their usage. And so that is now on the community solar providers themselves to make sure that the share sizes are correctly based on your annual expected usage. And then if they mess up and oversubscribe you, they have to give you a refund for any credits that they actually billed you for. And that you actually paid for. And so those are some consumer protections that are brand new. And the rules are in place and effective today. So if you do look at that chart on page 2 of your CMP bill and see any expired credits, call your community solar provider, ask where your refund is. And if you want help walking through that chart on page 2 of your utility bill, to make sure that you're getting the right size solar share. That is what Elizabeth in our office, our consumer advisor, is very, very good at. You can send her a picture of your bill and she will walk you through it and answer questions about how that banking process works, because it's hard to wrap your head around until you really understand what each column is representing. And we're happy to help with that at the Office of the Public Advocate.
Great. Well, I think we're almost out of time, so I think that's a good place to leave our conversation this morning. We thank everyone for attendance. We had over 80 people watching our webinar this morning, and lots of great questions. So one of the things that we do as part of Coffee and Climate is, so we'll send an email following up. We'll have contact information for our panelists. We can share information about how to access some of the resources that Heather mentioned for consumer protection to help people understand maybe what's going on with their solar subscription or other issues related to their bills. And again, there's so many great topics that came up. I think there's a lot of interest in this area. I think we'll probably want to do some more programming and have this conversation further. But again, thank you to all of our panelists, and thank you to everyone in the audience for all your great questions. And we'll look out for the email with the recording and the information and links. And we hope everyone enjoys this beautiful day in Maine. So great, thanks again.
Great. Yeah, great. Thank you guys so much. Great information. What a great panel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good day.